It was 11:47 at night. I remember that clearly because the second hand on my living room wall clock had just ticked past the 7. That was the exact moment the steel tire iron came down on my right knee. The sound was so loud that afterward, when I replayed it in my head, I always thought the whole building must have heard it. But nobody heard it. Or maybe nobody wanted to. First came the sound of bone breaking. It's hard to describe, like stepping on a frozen puddle in winter, except it wasn't ice, it was your own bone. Then came the sensation of warm liquid spraying out, running down my calf, soaking into the carpet in a dark spreading stain. My body went down uncontrollably, the back of my head smacking against the corner of the coffee table. Stars exploded behind my eyes, and the room spun. I was on the floor, my right leg completely gone. No feeling at all. I tried to push myself up, but my knee sent a bolt of agony through me like someone was stirring the joint with a red-hot poker. My teeth chattered, and a sound came out of my throat that I didn't recognize as my own voice. My brother stood over me. Cole Miller. 35 years old, 6'2", in a tailored suit with his hair gelled perfectly into place. The navy blue jacket still had a groom's boutonniere pinned to the lapel, the one meant for tomorrow's wedding. He was breathing hard, the tire iron shaking in his grip, his knuckles white from holding it too tight. "You ruined everything." He looked down at me with bloodshot eyes, like a mad bull. His voice wasn't loud, but every word was bitten off sharp, his teeth almost grinding. "Ella, you fucking ruined everything." I tried to say something, but all I could do was gasp. I stared at him, at the tire iron smeared with my blood, and my brain was a pot of boiling sludge. Then I heard clapping. Soft. Clap, clap, clap. Slow and deliberate, like applause after a good show. I turned my head painfully, my vision traveling past the legs of the sofa, and saw my mother. Diana Miller. She was standing where the entryway met the living room, wearing a pale lavender cashmere cardigan, half a glass of red wine still in her hand. On her face was an expression I'd never seen before, complicated, full of satisfaction, of relief, and something almost like triumph. "Good," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but every syllable landed clean in my ears. Finally someone took out the trash. Trash. I was lying on my own floor, my knee shattered, blood pooling around me, and my own mother had just called me trash. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but my eyes stayed dry, blinking was an effort. Adrenaline and pain had scrambled my senses. The whole world felt like it was behind frosted glass, distant and unreal. Cole dropped the tire iron. It hit the tile with a clang and bounced twice. He yanked at his tie, and the boutonniere fell off, crushed under his shoe, stuck crooked to his sole. He didn't look back. He pulled the front door open and walked out. My mother followed him, but before she left, she turned and looked at me over her shoulder. Her eyes were empty, like she was looking at a piece of furniture that had fallen over. The door slammed shut. I lay there, staring at the ceiling light fixture. A brass-colored thing I'd picked up at a flea market last year, 6 small bulbs arranged in a circle. Now those 6 bulbs had multiplied into 18, wobbling in lazy circles. My knee started to feel strange. Not the sharp pain anymore, something worse. An empty, hollow wrongness. I tried to wiggle my right toes, but I couldn't feel my foot at all. The panic hit harder than the pain. I shoved myself up on my elbows and looked down at my leg, and nearly passed out. My right leg, from the knee down, was bent at an angle that no human leg should ever bend at. The pant leg was torn open, and the skin underneath wasn't a normal color, purple-black, swollen like a balloon, with a split in the middle where I could see something white. At first I thought it was bone fragments. Then I realized it was my shattered kneecap. I dropped back down and started shaking. My whole body convulsed, teeth chattering. I couldn't tell if it was pain or terror. Probably both. It took me about 5 minutes to get myself under control. For 5 minutes, the only thought running through my head was, I have to call the police, I have to call the police. The coffee table was about 6 feet away, and my phone was on it. I started crawling, pushing with my left leg and my elbows, dragging that ruined right leg behind me. Every movement sent a fresh wave of pain through my knee, like someone sanding down my nerve endings. 6 feet took me almost 10 minutes. When I finally got my hands on the phone, I collapsed against the table leg, my fingers shaking so badly I could barely tap the screen. I dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm, asking what I needed. I said I'd been attacked, I was injured, I was bleeding. She told me to stay calm and asked for my address. After I gave it to her, I had no strength left. I just kept the phone against my ear and listened to her say the ambulance was on its way, I shouldn't move. I closed my eyes, curled on the floor. The ceiling light still wobbled overhead, making me dizzy. In the 15 or so minutes it took for the ambulance to arrive, a lot of images flooded my brain. The year I was 8, Cole threw my stuffed bear into the river, and when I ran crying to our mother, she said boys will be boys, don't be so sensitive. When I was 16, he borrowed my laptop, the one I'd saved 2 years of part-time job money to buy, said he needed it for a week, and then just lost it. When I asked him about it, he snapped that I should have kept better track of it. Mom chimed in, your brother's about to apply to colleges, let him focus. When I was 21, fresh out of college with my first real job, Cole said he needed $5,000 to invest in a business. He never paid me back. Last year, when money was tight and I finally got the nerve to bring it up, he rolled his eyes and scoffed at me for remembering such a small amount. Mom laughed and said he was saving for his wedding now, I shouldn't bother him. Those scenes kept playing in my head like a slideshow. I'd never really thought about them before. It was always just, family, you know? Let it go. But lying there on my own floor with my knee ground to gravel and my blood almost drained, I finally admitted a truth I'd known since childhood but never had the guts to face. In my mother's eyes, I was never a whole person. I was just a supporting character in my brother's perfect life script. Useful when needed, disposable when convenient. Someone who could be sacrificed. Used up. Cleaned out. The ambulance siren grew louder, closer. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling. And a voice from the deepest, smallest corner of me, the part I'd always kept quiet, spoke up. It said, you're done owing them. From today on, you owe them nothing. The ambulance ride was a blur of fragments. The plasticky smell of the oxygen mask. A young male paramedic saying, hang in there ma'am, we're almost there. The fluorescent lights of the hospital ceiling scrolling past one by one as they wheeled me in. Then the ER. White coats moving around me, someone cutting my pants off, someone putting a needle in my arm, someone shining some instrument at my knee. A doctor in a mask looked down and said I needed surgery right away, asked if I had any family present. I said no. He paused, then didn't ask again. Before the surgery they took X-rays. When the films came back, the doctor frowned and murmured something to the resident beside him, I didn't catch it. Later, when the nurse had me sign consent forms, I caught a glimpse of the image. I don't know anything about reading orthopedics, but even I could tell from the look of that knee that it was bad. Tibial plateau fracture. Shattered kneecap, broken into 3 pieces. Torn meniscus. Ligament damage all over. The doctor used the gentlest tone he could manage. They'd put in plates and screws, but the joint surface had taken significant damage. My range of motion would be limited. Long walks would hurt. Rainy days would hurt. And when I got older, I'd have a much higher chance of needing a full replacement. I lay on the prep table listening with a blank face. The nurse asked if I was in pain. I said yes. She pushed something into my fore, and the effect came fast. My eyelids started to sink. The anesthesia hit, and then there was nothing. When I woke up, it was the next afternoon. The hospital room was quiet, the curtains half drawn, letting in a yellowish late-day light. My right leg was suspended from the foot of the bed in a heavy cast from hip to toe. The anesthesia hadn't fully worn off, my head felt stuffed with cotton, but my knee was sending up a steady dull ache, like someone tapping it with a hammer, slow and relentless. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, sorting through last night, piece by piece. The tire iron. Cole. Mom. The clapping. The word trash. Every frame was crisp in my memory, burned into my cortex. A nurse came in to change my dressing. She adjusted the bed so I could sit up a little, brought me a cup of water. I drank it, and my throat finally stopped feeling like sandpaper. She told me the surgery had taken over 4 hours and gone well, but the recovery would be long. I should prepare myself. She'd barely been gone 10 minutes when the door opened again. My mother walked in. She wore a beige trench coat, her hair pinned up neat, light makeup on. She was carrying a thermos. Her face was flat, unreadable. She set the thermos on the bedside table, careful with the movement, and sat down in the chair beside me. We were quiet for a while. I looked at her, she looked at my cast. "Good, you're awake," she finally said, her tone mild. "The doctor said the surgery went well." I didn't answer. She didn't seem to expect me to. She opened the thermos, poured some broth into the lid, and held it toward my mouth. I didn't open. She held it there a few seconds, then set it down. She cleared her throat, like she was working up to something. "Ella," she said. "The police will probably come by to ask you questions." I watched her. "When they do, you tell them you fell." Her voice was steady, businesslike. "You got up in the middle of the night for water, didn't turn on the light, fell down the stairs." "Got it." I opened my mouth, but all that came out was a hoarse, "What?" "Cole can't have trouble," she cut me off, the firmness in her voice flaring up. "The Hayes family called off the wedding, but they haven't pressed charges yet. As long as this doesn't go criminal, there's still room to fix things. If you tell the police what really happened, Cole goes to prison. Your brother's life will be over. Do you want that?" I wanted to say that he'd nearly killed me last night. That he'd smashed my knee with a tire iron and left me bleeding on the floor. But I couldn't get the words past the lump in my throat. My mother saw me faltering and softened her voice a little. She leaned forward, reached out and touched my arm, that familiar pleading tone creeping in. "Ella, I know this is hard on you. But think about it, what good does it do to blow this up? You're a young woman. If your own brother ends up a convicted criminal, how does that look for you? What will the relatives think?" Her fingers patted my arm, gentle, coaxing. "Just say you fell. Everyone can move on. Cole knows he was wrong, and he'll make it up to you later. Listen to your mother, okay?" I looked into her eyes. Those eyes I'd always thought were warm, loving. All I saw now was calculation. She was bargaining with my injury. My knee. My life. Just another chip to trade for her son's golden future. I closed my eyes and turned my face toward the window. "We'll see," I said. My voice was barely a whisper. She didn't push further. She stood, said a few more hollow things about rest and recovery, and left with the thermos. The door shut, and the room was quiet again except for the monitor's steady beep. I opened my eyes and stared out at the bare maple tree outside the window. Winter was coming. Most of the leaves were gone, just a few brown ones shivering on the branches. A thought crystallized in my mind: if I did what my mother asked, if I told the police it was an accident, then this whole thing would just disappear. Cole would face no consequences. My mother would go back to being the proud mother of a perfect son. The relatives would go back to pretending everything was fine. Only me, with my shattered leg and my shattered heart, would carry all of it alone. And after a while, everyone would just act like nothing had ever happened. And what would I have gained? A hollow "I'm sorry"? A vague promise that I'd be compensated later? I'd heard that my whole life, and it never once came true. My nose stung. My eyes felt hot. But I didn't cry. I reached for my phone on the bedside table. Several unread messages. A colleague from the firm asking where I was. Sarah asking if I was okay. And one from an unknown number, just a single line. "Ella Miller, I'm Kate Morrison. Cole's wife in Sydney. We need to talk." I stared at that message for a long time. Then I opened my contacts, found the card Officer Ortega had left me, and typed, "Officer Ortega, this is Ella Miller. About last night's incident, I have some things I need to tell you in person." When I hit send, I knew I'd crossed some line. Behind that line was the old me. A good girl who always put family first. And ahead of that line was someone I hadn't met yet. But I already knew, she wasn't going to spend her life with her neck tucked in. Officer Ortega came to the hospital the next afternoon. She was a Latina woman in her 40s, short hair, lean build, sharp eyes. Last time, in the ER, she'd only asked a few basic questions. This time she carried a recorder and a notebook and sat beside my bed with a much more formal air. I started by telling her about my mother's visit and the lie she wanted me to tell. Officer Ortega's pen stopped on the page. She looked up. "Your mother asked you to give false testimony?" "Yes. She said if I told the truth, my brother would be done for." "And what was your response at the time?" I said I hadn't responded yet, I was still thinking. She nodded, her face neutral, but I noticed her pen made an extra mark on the page. Then I told her the whole story from the start. Cole bursting in. The tire iron. My knee. Him leaving. My mother clapping. I tried to keep my voice steady, but when I got to the part about finally someone took out the trash, my throat caught anyway. Officer Ortega let me finish without interrupting. She closed her notebook and looked at me, her voice a little softer. "It takes courage to give a new statement, Ms. Miller. We'll enter your amended testimony into the case file. We'll also have a forensic specialist re-examine your knee injury. Blunt force trauma and a fall leave different fracture patterns. You don't need to worry about that." I nodded. She stood to leave, but I stopped her. "Officer, there's one more thing." She turned. "The reason my brother attacked me was because his wedding was called off. It was called off because someone exposed his previous marriage. He married a woman in Australia years ago and never got divorced. That's bigamy. I was the one who exposed it. The Australian wife is named Kate Morrison. She contacted me." Officer Ortega sat back down, reopened her notebook. Go on. I told her everything, finding the photo, sending the anonymous letter, Kate coming to town, the wedding day chaos. Officer Ortega's brow furrowed deeper as I went on. And, I added, from what I understand, Cole took a lot of money from the Hayes family during the wedding preparations. False consulting contracts, that kind of thing. I don't know the exact amount, but Kate has some documents. Officer Ortega drew a long breath, closed her notebook. Ms. Miller, the information you're giving me is significant. The bigamy and financial matters are outside my direct jurisdiction, but I'll refer them to the appropriate departments. Before I do that, though, I need you to confirm something. Are you firmly committed to this new testimony? Will you change your mind again under family pressure? I met her eyes. I'm not going to change my mind. After she left, the room felt lighter. I leaned back against my pillows. My heart was racing, but there was a strange buoyancy in my chest, like a weight that had been pressing on me for years had finally cracked open just enough to let air through. Less than an hour later, there was a knock at the door, and a head poked through the crack. Ella? It's me. Kate. She looked thinner than her photo, hollow cheeks, dark circles, but her eyes were alive. She wore a faded denim jacket and carried a bag of fruit. She came in, set the fruit on the table, pulled up a chair, and looked me over. Her gaze stopped at the cast. He did this, she asked. I nodded. Kate shut her eyes and cursed, long and filthy. Her fists clenched and unclenched. That piece of shit. When I heard on the plane you were in the hospital, I knew it had to be him. What kind of animal? You did the right thing, and he does this to you. I managed a weak smile. How did it go with you? How did you find Lena on the wedding day? Kate waved a hand and told me the story. After she got my anonymous letter, it took her a while to work up the nerve to fly over. Once she was here, she found Lena through social media, sent her photos of the Australian marriage certificate. Lena was in the middle of getting her makeup done when she saw them. She went straight to her parents, and the Hayes family shut the whole thing down immediately. Guests were sent home. Lena cried a lot, Kate said. But she's got spine. She had security throw Cole out of the venue. Cole called me like a madman afterward. I blocked him. I pictured it, feeling both satisfaction and a pang of sadness. What about your mother? Kate asked. What's her position? I was quiet for a moment. Then I told her about my mother's hospital visit, the pressure to lie. Kate listened, her expression shifting. After a long silence, she said, Ella, is it always been like this in your family? She's always taken his side? I nodded. My whole life. Kate sighed and pulled out her phone, scrolled a moment, and handed it to me. You want to know how much Cole took from the Hayes family? The screen showed a bank transfer receipt. The payer was Hayes Building Supply, the payee was Cole's personal account. The memo line read, Project Consulting Fee. The amount, $120,000. This is just one, Kate said, scrolling to two more screenshots, one for $80,000, one for $50,000. Total so far, $250,000. He told them he was lining up investment opportunities. Hayes family lawyers are collecting more evidence, but right now they're leaning toward keeping it quiet. They don't want the media. So they're not pressing charges? Not yet. They want their money back, and they want it to go away. But if Cole doesn't repay it, they'll take legal action. I leaned back, turning it over in my head. If the Hayes family settled privately, Cole would just lose some money and his job, nothing truly devastating. And on the criminal side, if I caved and changed my statement, the assault charge wouldn't stick either. The only way he'd face real consequences was if I held. Kate stayed about an hour. As she left, she took my hand and said, very seriously, "Ella, I'm grateful you sent that letter. If you hadn't, I'd still be stuck in that fake marriage, and Cole would be out there wearing my name while he scammed someone else. What you did was right. And what happened to your leg, that's not your fault. It's his." After she left, I watched the sky darken outside the window and thought for a long time. I didn't sleep that night. The room was quiet except for the occasional phone ringing at the nurse's station. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the sound of the tire iron coming down, my mother's voice saying cleaned out, the bank transfer screenshots Kate had shown me. Piece by piece, a picture emerged. Cole wasn't just some brother who snapped in the heat of the moment. He was a planner, a long-term fraud. He deceived Kate, Lena, the Hayes family, me, our mother, everyone who'd ever believed in his perfect man image. And me? I'd spent 27 years living under his shadow. Always yielding. Always letting it go. Always being told that my brother mattered more. And then I got a shattered knee for all that yielding. Enough. I reached under my pillow, pulled out my phone, and texted Sarah, "Can you find me a lawyer who does commercial fraud cases? I need to talk to someone." Sarah replied instantly, "Yes. I'll ask around tomorrow." I put the phone away, rolled onto my side. The injured leg was suspended and I couldn't move it much, but my thoughts were no longer scattered. They'd condensed into one clear shape. He was going to pay for every single choice he'd made. Sarah came through the next morning with a lawyer's contact. Gary Chen, a Chinese-Canadian who specialized in commercial fraud and financial crime. I called him that afternoon and laid out the basics. He said he'd take the case. Once I got my materials together and sent them over, we'd discuss next steps. On the police side, things were moving too. Officer Ortega called with the forensic results. The fracture pattern was consistent with blunt force impact, not an accidental fall. Even if I'd stuck with the lie, the evidence would have made Cole look guilty. But, Ortega said over the phone, "We still need your willingness. If you're solid, the case is strong. If you waver, all the evidence in the world won't help." "I won't waver," I said. I hung up, and within 10 minutes, my phone started ringing. First, Aunt Margaret. Margaret was my mother's older sister, retired teacher, inveterate busybody. She launched right in, "Ella, how could you do this to your brother? He's always been good to you. Now you're taking him to the police? Your mother cried all night. Can't you be reasonable?" I leaned back against my pillows, phone to my ear, silent. Margaret kept going, "I heard you just tripped and fell. Young people fall all the time. Why are you making such a big deal out of it? You're being too rigid. Families are supposed to forgive. Call the police right now, tell them it was an accident, and let this go." When she finally paused, I said, "Aunt Margaret, my kneecap is shattered. The bone is in pieces. They put metal plates and screws in my leg. The doctor says I'll have trouble walking for the rest of my life. This is not a trip and fall." Margaret sputtered, but she found her footing quickly. "So what, it's just a leg. Young people heal. Your brother lost his job, his fiancée, he's falling apart. What more do you want? You won't be satisfied until he's in prison?" I waited a beat, then said, "Aunt Margaret, I have to go. The nurse is here." I hung up and put the phone on silent. Not even 10 minutes later, Cousin Jennifer called. I didn't pick up. She left voice messages, her husband was looking for a new job, and if Cole's story got out, it would hurt their reputation. Could I please not be so selfish? I deleted them all without finishing. In the afternoon, Uncle Robert called from Calgary. He was the eldest in the family, normally kept to himself, but this time he made an exception. He gave me a long speech about family harmony, about taking the high road, about letting things go. His tone was gentler than my mother's, but the substance was the same. I heard him out. Then I said, "Uncle Robert, if someone took a tire iron to your daughter's knee, and her mother stood by and watched, would you tell your daughter to let it go?" The line went silent for a long time. Then he sighed. "I won't involve myself in your decision. You handle it how you think best." He was the only one who didn't keep pushing. Over the next few days, my phone nearly melted down. Relatives came at me from every angle, pleading, scolding, crying, lecturing. I answered at first, then stopped. I put the phone in airplane mode and only checked it at set times. My firm gave me extended medical leave. My boss, Mr. Taylor, called personally and asked if I needed anything. I said I was fine, thank you. Sarah messaged me every day, gossip, jokes, pictures of her cat. She knew I was alone in that hospital. The surprise came from Lena. After the wedding fell apart, I hadn't dared contact her. No matter how right I'd been, I'd still ruined her wedding. Then one night, I got a text from an unknown number. "Ella, this is Lena. Kate gave me your number. I wanted to say thank you. I don't know how else to put it, but thank you. Get well soon. Lena." I stared at that message until my eyes stung. I wrote back just 4 words, "You take care too." The only person who didn't contact me was my mother. She'd vanished after I changed my statement. But I knew she wasn't idle. Sarah told me she'd heard from the relatives that my mother was furious, throwing things around the house. She was also asking around about Cole's case, trying to find someone who could pull strings. I didn't care what strings she pulled. I only cared about one thing, gathering every piece of evidence I could find so Cole would get what he deserved. Recovery was 100 times harder than I'd expected. After discharge, I moved back to my small apartment, moving on crutches, barely able to take care of myself. When the cast came off, it was replaced with an adjustable brace and daily physiotherapy. The exercises were simple in theory: bend the knee, straighten the knee. But every session left me drenched in sweat, the plates and screws grinding inside my joint, like someone had packed gravel under my skin. Physical pain I could manage. It was the nights that wore me down. I'd never been an insomniac. Now I woke up 2-3 times a night. Every time I closed my eyes, the tire iron came down again. My mother's voice sang cleaned out. I'd snap awake at 3 or 4 in the morning, drenched in sweat, staring at the ceiling, the rage and hurt seething in my chest like a stone I couldn't swallow. But I didn't stop. During the day, I went to physio. At night, I sat at my kitchen table with a stack of documents, the Australian financial records Kate had sent, company registrations I'd pulled from public databases, Cole's career timeline in Canada. I cross-referenced, I plotted timelines, I drew diagrams in colored marker. My small table was soon buried in paper, sticky notes, hand-drawn charts. All those years of auditing at the firm, now they were paying off. The first breakthrough came from the bankrupt company. Following Kate's leads, I found that Cole had registered a small firm called Miller Building Consultants after returning from Australia. It folded after less than 2 years, owing over $100,000, mostly to subcontractors and suppliers. But 3 months before the bankruptcy, a batch of equipment and several client contracts had been transferred to a newly formed company. The address of that company was in the same business complex as the firm Cole later joined, Hayes Property Group, just 2 floors away. The new company's registered director was a man named David Collins, not Cole. But I found a job posting that company had put up, and the contact email had the username Miller. Cole's initials plus his last name. He'd been running a shell company under a false identity, shoveling his bad debts out of sight. I compiled this into a document and sent it to Gary Chen. He replied the same day, strong-led. He'd start legally requesting bank statements and corporate filings. Then I found another thread. At Hayes Property Group, Cole's role was regional business manager, responsible for developing high-end residential projects. He'd introduced Hayes Building Supply to several supposed project partners, all of which turned out to be shell companies. The consulting fees the Hayes family paid went into those companies' accounts and were quickly routed onward. One trail led to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Together with the earlier amount, the total I could trace on paper was approaching $400,000. $400,000. I stared at the numbers on my screen, my feelings tangled. Part of me was horrified. How deep did this go? The person I'd grown up with, how many secret crimes had he committed? And part of me felt a bleak irony. He had this level of cunning and calculation. If he'd applied it to legitimate work, he could have built something real. Instead, he chose to steal. Greed. Greed for a class he didn't belong to. Greed for a fortune he hadn't earned. Greed for a path he wasn't entitled to walk. And in the end, he couldn't hold any of it. I sent these findings to Gary and to the Commercial Crimes Unit, through Officer Ortega. All of it together, it was more than enough to make him sweat. The case entered formal legal proceedings about 2 months after I was discharged. A lot happened in between. First, Cole was arrested. They picked him up at the airport, carrying a suitcase full of cash and jewelry. Word was he'd been planning to fly to the States to lay low, but the police moved faster. After the arrest, my mother came to my apartment again. It was past 8 in the evening. I was at my table sorting through files when the doorbell rang. I hobbled over on my crutch and opened it. She stood in the hallway, gaunt, her hair a mess, her eyes shot with red veins. No makeup. A wrinkled parka. She looked wrecked. We stood there for a few seconds. She looked past my shoulder into the apartment and saw the mountains of paper on the table. Her face twitched, then hardened. "Ella," she said, her voice hoarse and raw. "Cole's been arrested. He's going to prison. Are you satisfied now?" "Mom, come in," I said. She didn't move. She stood in the doorway, both hands gripping the zipper pull of her jacket, knuckles white. "Drop this. Pull back your so-called evidence. I'll get a lawyer to negotiate a lighter sentence, a year or 2, that's all. What you're doing now, you're putting him in the ground." I leaned against the doorframe, my crutch under one arm, looking down at my right leg. The brace was still on. I still limped. My knee still ached when the weather turned. "Mom," I said, "when he shattered my knee, you stood there watching. You clapped. You said what you said." My mother's lips quivered. Her face contorted for a moment. Then her voice shot up. "I'm your mother. I raised you for 27 years. And now you're sending your own brother to prison over this. Where's your heart?" Her voice echoed down the hallway. The neighbor cracked their door open to peek. I looked at that face twisted with fury, and suddenly it felt foreign. This was my mother? The woman who'd braided my hair when I was small, who'd stayed up all night by my bed when I had a fever. Had she always been like this, and I just hadn't wanted to see? "Mom," I said, my voice even, calm enough to surprise myself. "You think my shattered knee is this? You think your son leaving me on the floor bleeding, crawling 6 feet to reach a phone, is this? You think him defrauding people, lying to everyone who trusted him, is just this?" My mother stared at me, lips trembling harder. "To you, everything except Cole's future is just this," I said, each word deliberate. "My leg. My life. The rest of my existence. It's all just this. You never saw me as a person." The hallway was silent as a grave. She stood frozen, her whole body shaking. Then tears burst out of her, sudden and messy. But even as she sobbed, she kept saying, "How can you be so cruel? He's your blood. Ella, how can you?" I watched her cry. That familiar ache twisted in my chest again. But this time, I didn't soften. "Mom," I said at last, "you can hate me if you want. But I'm not dropping the case. The moment that tire iron came down, you lost any right to ask me to do anything for this family. Because that family never did anything for me." I closed the door. The moment it clicked shut, my mother's wail broke through, raw and heartbreaking. I leaned my back against the door and slid down to the floor, burying my face against my good knee. I didn't cry. I just breathed, deep and ragged. The stone in my chest was still there, but I could feel it starting to crack. I sat on the sofa for a long time that night. The apartment was quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator. On the table, my files were stacked neat and orderly. I picked up my phone and texted Gary, all evidence compiled. "I'm not backing down. Please push forward." One word came back, "Good." The trial started on a gray winter day, thin snow drifting down. I wore the black suit I'd set aside for this day. My hair was pulled back, light makeup to cover the dark circles. The leg brace had been swapped for a smaller knee support, hidden under my trousers. I could walk without crutches now, though slowly, and my knee swelled after too much standing. Sarah took a half day off to come with me. She drove me to the courthouse and squeezed my hand at the entrance. "Go ahead," she said. "I'll be out here." The courtroom was warm. I sat in the front row of the gallery and looked at the defendant's table. Cole was there in a gray shirt, his hair short, his face gaunt. He'd lost weight, cheeks hollowed out, skin sallow. He never looked my way, just stared down at the table. In the gallery behind me, my mother was 2 rows back, with Aunt Margaret. She wore a black coat and dark glasses, shrunk into her seat like a shadow. Aunt Margaret's face was pinched and sour throughout. The prosecutor opened with a clear timeline: Cole's marriage to Kate in Sydney. The years of non-divorce. His engagement to Lena as a single man. My exposure on the eve of the wedding. The assault that night. The attempted subornation of perjury. And the commercial fraud uncovered afterward. Every link was supported by evidence. The first witness was Kate. She wore a white blouse, her red hair tied in a ponytail. On the stand, her voice was steady. She described the marriage in Australia, Cole's disappearance, his years of stonewalling the divorce, and his assertion of single status in Canada. The prosecutor presented the notarized Australian marriage certificate and years of correspondence showing Cole's full knowledge of his ongoing marital status. When Kate stepped down, she passed my seat and touched my shoulder. "Your turn now," she whispered. Then it was my turn. My legs shook a little when I stood, but I steadied myself. As I walked to the witness stand, I glanced back. My mother was there, the dark glasses covering most of her face, but I could see her fingers twisting the strap of her handbag. I sat in the wooden chair. The microphone was in front of me. The prosecutor began by confirming my identity, then asked, "Ms. Miller, please describe what happened on the night of November 15th. I took a breath and started from the beginning. I told them Cole had arrived around 11, banging on the door like something was wrong. I opened it. He barged in screaming that I'd ruined his life. He had the tire iron. He waved it, and when I backed up, he swung. Where did he strike you? My right knee. How many times? Once. Just once. I paused, my voice wobbling. But that was enough. When I fell, I couldn't move my leg. I looked down, and my knee was turned, you know, a normal knee points forward. Mine was pointing sideways. The doctor later said my kneecap was shattered and my tibial plateau was fractured. The courtroom went still. I could hear someone gasping in the back. The prosecutor presented my medical records and the forensic report. I signed them. Then he asked, "After you fell, what did the defendant do?" He left. He dropped the tire iron and walked out. Was anyone else there? Yes. My mother was at my apartment. Diana Miller. She was present the whole time. She didn't call the police, she didn't call an ambulance. She left with Cole. A murmur rippled through the gallery. I felt the prick of eyes on the back of my head. The prosecutor also asked about my mother's hospital visit and her demand that I lie. I answered honestly. It wasn't easy. Each time I retold the story, my knee seemed to ache again, as if my body remembered for me. But I told it all. After me, a detective from the Commercial Crimes Unit testified. His material was more exhaustive than I'd expected. They'd followed my leads, traced Cole's shell company chain, identified the flow of that $400,000, and discovered several more payments the Hayes family hadn't yet found. The detective said something I'll never forget, "Mr. Miller, through fabricated project partnerships and false consulting contracts, illegally obtained approximately $470,000 over a 3-year period. Additionally, while knowing he had an undissolved marriage, he used a false identity to enter into another engagement, constituting bigamy and fraud. Our conclusion is that these were not isolated, impulsive acts. They were the product of a long-term, systematic scheme." Long-term, systematic scheme. Those words landed in the courtroom like stones. Cole never looked up from the defendant's table. His lawyer gave the routine defense: extreme emotional distress, momentary lapse of judgment. On the business side, he claimed cognitive errors without malicious intent. But the prosecution countered swiftly. 3 days before the assault, Cole had still been transferring money to that offshore account. The day before, he'd been on the phone with an associate discussing how to handle Hayes's debt collection. Moment of passion turned out to be just a panic when the scheme was about to break open. The trial lasted all day. 9 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon, with 40 minutes for lunch. The rest was testimony, cross-examination, evidence. I sat through all of it. Sometimes I was called up to answer more questions. Sometimes I just sat and watched evidence after evidence slide into the record. With each new document, the whispers in the gallery grew louder. I even heard someone behind me mutter, "What a con artist, and his mother is complicit too, isn't she?" My mother couldn't sit still in the afternoon. She left twice, coming back each time with redder eyes. By the end, she'd taken her glasses off, staring at the defendant's table, her lips trembling constantly. Aunt Margaret held her hand. Near the end, the judge asked Cole if he had anything to say. He stood, silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his words surprised everyone. "I'm sorry to my sister. I didn't mean to hurt her that badly. That night I lost control. I never intended to hurt her." It sounded like remorse. "But I noticed something," he said, only, "sorry to my sister." He made no mention of the $470,000. The fake marriage. The suppliers and creditors he'd stiffed. He was trying to package himself as a man who'd snapped in a family moment, using sympathy to blur the bigger, filthier crimes. In that instant, I saw him completely. He didn't believe what he'd done was wrong, he just regretted getting caught. The judge said sentencing would come on another date. As Cole was led away by marshals, he finally glanced at me. His eyes were hollow, a blank stare, like he was looking at a stranger from far away. That wasn't a brother's look. I turned my face away. The sentencing hearing came on a heavy snow day. I didn't go. Sarah had advised against it, said it'd be a circus, that my mother might cause a scene. She was right. I'd already done what I needed to do. I didn't need to be there for the numbers. That morning, I sat on my sofa with the cat on my lap. Snow was coming down in sheets, turning the city white. I made tea, put my phone on silent, and set it on the table. Around 11, Sarah's message came in. I read it slowly. Guilty. Aggravated assault, 3 years. Obstruction of justice, 1 year 6 months, concurrent. Commercial fraud, 2 years. Total sentence, 6 years and 3 months, no parole. Bigamy wasn't charged due to statute of limitations, but the judge noted in the sentencing memo, defendant exhibited serious dishonesty in marital matters, so that's pinned on the record. Civil damages, $180,000 for medical costs, rehab, and emotional distress, paid in installments. I read it 3 times. 6 years and 3 months. I looked out at the snow. Down on the street, kids were running around, their laughter muffled by the glass. I stroked the cat's fur, and it rolled over, showing me its belly. I typed back to Sarah, "Thank you." Then I sent a short message to Kate, sentenced. 6 years, 3 months. Kate's reply was instant, "Hell yes. I'm opening a bottle tonight." I smiled and set the phone down. I sat by the window all afternoon, watching the snow. My knee ached. The weather report said this cold snap would last a few more days, and my leg would be uncomfortable. But the strange thing was, that stone in my chest was gone. I could breathe deep. Even the knee pain seemed easier to bear. Toward evening, a letter came, handwritten, the envelope addressed in a shaky scrawl. I opened it and found Uncle Robert's writing. The note was short, "Ella, I was wrong before. I asked myself your question. If anyone shattered your cousin's knee, I'd never tell her to let it go. You did right. Get well. Call me when you need me. Uncle Robert." I read it twice, then folded it carefully into my drawer. At 7 in the evening, the doorbell rang. I opened it and found my mother standing in the hallway. She was alone. No mask, no glasses. Her face was raw from the cold, eyes swollen. She'd been crying for a long time. She stood with her hands at her sides, hunched in her coat. She looked much older. That coat was the navy one I'd bought her for her birthday 2 years ago. She used to say it suited her. We stood across the threshold. Her lips moved, her voice a ragged whisper, "Ella, your brother." "I know," I said. The sentence came down. My mother's tears spilled over, silent. She didn't make a sound, just stood there with tears running down her cheeks, not wiping them away, looking at me with something shattered in her eyes. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came. I leaned against the doorframe and watched her cry. There was so much I could have asked her. What were you thinking when you clapped that night? Did you see the person on the floor was your daughter? When you came to the hospital to make me lie, how did the scales tilt so completely toward Cole every single time? In all these years, was there one moment you took my side? But watching her tears, I asked none of it. Some answers, you already know, and hearing them spoken just makes it worse. My mother stood there a long time, never crossing the threshold. Finally she stepped back, swiped her face with one hand, and said, voice breaking, I just wanted to see if you were okay. I'm okay, I said. She nodded. Looked at me one more time. Then she turned and walked away. The hallway lights flicked on and off. Her footsteps faded, swallowed by the elevator chime. I closed the door and leaned against it, eyes shut. The ache in my chest wasn't sharp anymore, just a dull weight, like humid air after rain. The cat hopped off the sofa and wound around my ankles. I bent down and picked it up, carried it back to the window. Snow was still falling, thicker than ever. The rooftops across the street were now thickly blanketed white. I held the cat and watched the snow, and in my chest, there was only stillness. About 3 months after the sentencing, the day finally came. The physiotherapist removed my knee brace. I'd worn that brace for almost a year, from the heavy cast to the adjustable frame to the final lightweight support. When it came off, my right leg met the air for the first time in ages, cool and exposed. A long pink scar crossed my knee, with small round marks around it where the screws had been. The doctor told me to try walking. I held the wall and took a few steps. My knee bent further than before, still stiff, but no longer stuck. I did one circuit of the room and came back. The doctor said the recovery was solid. I could live normally from here, just no running, jumping, or heavy lifting. I stood at the clinic entrance, looking down at my legs. The right was noticeably thinner than the left, muscle atrophy, but at least it looked like a human leg again. Not that monster wrapped in bandages and metal. I sat in my car for a long time after, watching people go by. Something welled up in me, hard to name. Almost a year had passed since I'd crawled out of that pool of blood, since I'd woken from surgery, since I'd clawed my way through painful rehab to stand here like a normal person. That day, the sun was warm. It was the first time since the injury that I'd felt the sun as warmth. At home, I cleared my desk of all the case files and packed them away in labeled boxes, stored in the closet. With the table empty, the room felt vast. I poured a glass of water and sat there, remembering. The crack of the tire iron. My mother's contorted face saying cleaned out. Officer Ortega's first visit, me shivering under the sheets. Kate's steady testimony in court. Sarah's late-night cat pictures. Uncle Robert's handwritten letter. All those faces. All those moments, good and bad, packed into less than a year. They'd shattered the soft, indecisive shell of who I used to be, and something new had grown from the shards. The new me had a limp, a knee that ached in the rain, a slower walk, no high heels, no running. But the new me had a heart that was solid and whole, that had seen the worst and still found light. The old Ella, the one who'd always let things slide, who'd always said fine and it's okay, died that night at 11:47, between the kitchen and the living room, under a steel tire iron. The woman who'd crawled back on crutches, step by step, I wasn't going to let anyone push her around again. After Cole went to prison, I didn't follow his news. Sarah mentioned once that he wasn't doing well inside. Someone had floated the idea of early release, but he hadn't cooperated. I didn't ask for details and I didn't care. My mother and I lost touch entirely. She didn't reach out, and neither did I. When people asked at holidays if I was going home, I said I didn't have a home to go to. It wasn't bitterness, just fact. That home had ceased to exist the night she clapped. Kate went back to Australia, sold the Sydney place, moved to Perth to be near her parents. She sent postcards sometimes, beaches, sunsets. Last I heard, she had a new boyfriend, a primary school teacher, kind and steady. I was happy for her. Lena had truly moved on. She went to Europe, studied in Paris. On Instagram, she posted photos of herself in Florence and in cafes along the Seine, laughing, radiant. That train wreck of a wedding was someone else's story now. Sarah was still my best friend. She came over on weekends, and sometimes we did nothing but watch bad reality shows on the sofa, laughing until we couldn't breathe. She knew my knee acted up in damp weather and always brought me heat packs. Uncle Robert called now and then to check in. He retired and moved to my city. We'd have dinner and he'd tell stories from his post office days that had me in stitches. He never brought up Cole or my mother unless I did first. My new job was going well. My boss trusted me, promoted me last year. I was a senior auditor now, making better money. I was saving to buy a bigger place, maybe with a small yard where the cat could sunbathe. As for romance, I wasn't in a hurry. Last year, a new colleague had been kind to me, walking slower when we did group hikes, making sure I didn't overdo it. We went out a few times, but something didn't click. He was gentle, decent, but at some point he'd said, "Your brother was probably just under a lot of pressure," and I'd gone cold. He hadn't meant it as an excuse, but it showed me that he couldn't understand what I'd been through. He wasn't a bad person, but we weren't on the same frequency. So I let it go. Maybe later. Not now. The screws in my knee are permanent, the doctor said. If they don't get infected, they can stay in for life. I don't mind them. They're markers, reminders of where I've been. Without them, my leg wouldn't have held. On good days, I walk by the lake. Slow, measured steps. When my knee aches, I stop on a bench and watch the water birds. There's an old oak tree by the shore, thick with shade. I sit there sometimes with a book, or just sit and let the time pass. I used to be restless, always needed to be doing something productive. But I'm not in a hurry anymore. Sometimes I think about that tire iron. I don't hate it. Strange, I don't hate the object. It was just a thing. The person holding it made the choice. And I don't hate Cole either. Hate takes too much energy, and he's not part of my life anymore. I'm just grateful. Grateful I called the police. Grateful I changed my statement. Grateful I held the line every time I wanted to cave. Life is full of crossroads. At some of them, if you step back, you'll spend your whole life stepping back. I walked through the narrowest, darkest one, and at the other end, there was light. Not fireworks. Not some big triumphant finale. Just light, solid, steady, enough to see the path ahead. That afternoon I walked home from the lake. The sunset had painted the sky purple-red. The cat was waiting on the windowsill, and when I opened the door, it hopped down and circled my ankles. I changed shoes, washed my hands, heated up some soup. Outside, the sky went dark. Streetlights came on one by one. I sat at the table with my soup, the cat curled at my feet, purring. The only sounds were my spoon against the bowl and the cat's rumble. I realized, this is good. Just being alive. Just living quietly. It's that simple. About a year and a half after the sentencing, spring came. The cherry trees outside were in full bloom, petals scattering in the breeze. I was on the balcony reading, the cat beside me watching a sparrow in the yard, its tail twitching. A thick envelope slid under the door, prison letterhead. I picked it up. Cole Miller's name on the back, with an inmate number. I froze for a second. He'd never contacted me. A whole year and a half of silence. I held the envelope a long time, weighing whether to open it. Like a wound that's healed over, you know tearing it might make it bleed, but you also want to know what's underneath. I opened it. The letter was long, 6 pages, the handwriting neater than I'd expected. Cole rambled, disjointed. He talked about prison being hard, he'd lost weight, couldn't sleep, kept replaying old memories. He said he'd finally understood something, that when he took that money, he'd already known he was heading the wrong way. But he couldn't stop. Because stopping meant admitting his whole perfect life was a lie, and he couldn't face that. That part seemed genuine. Then the tone shifted. He fell back on excuses. I was young, everyone in that industry does it. If someone had pulled me aside, I wouldn't have gone this far. In the final paragraphs, there was even a subtle hint, if I hadn't exposed him, he might have married Lena, cleaned up his debts, and turned out fine. The last line, Ella, you're my sister. I'm your brother. We shouldn't end like this. Can you forgive me? I know I don't deserve it, but please give me a chance. When I get out, I'll make it right. I promise. I folded the letter and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Cherry petals drifted past the window. If this had come a year and a half ago, I would have cried. I would have felt vindicated. Finally, he admitted he was wrong. I would have clung to forgiveness like a lifeline. Now, I just felt tired. Not tired of him, tired of the pattern, the old familiar loop. Nothing in his letter was real remorse. I was wrong meant, I want you to stop hating me. Compensation was a promise of a future that hadn't arrived. Forgive me was a door he wanted opened, not for me, but to release his own shame. From start to finish, not one sentence asked, how's your knee? Does it still hurt? Are you okay? Not one. He didn't even mention our mother. As if the person clapping in the background had nothing to do with him. I read it twice, folded it back, and put it in the envelope. I didn't reply. Later, Gary told me Cole's lawyers had been pushing for early release, good behavior, showing remorse. Gary asked my position. I said legal matters were his call, but I would not sign any letter of leniency or forgiveness. Gary said, understood. A month later, the petition was denied. Cole's behavior inside was acceptable, but the court noted that he'd long denied his crimes, coerced a family member into perjury, and had not made any substantive restitution to the victim. No early release. I got the news sitting at my desk at work. Sarah looked over and asked what was up. I said nothing, just that a stone had settled. That night, I dug the letter out of my drawer, hesitated, then fed it through the shredder. The whir lasted a few seconds, and the paper came out as a pile of fine white strips. I won't forgive him. Not to punish him, to protect myself. Forgiveness has to be earned. He hasn't done anything to deserve it. Maybe someday he will. But that's a future that hasn't arrived. When word got out that Cole's early release had been denied, I knew my mother would come. She did. About 2 weeks later, on a weekend, I came home from grocery shopping and found her sitting on the bench downstairs. She hadn't come up. She sat there with a small suitcase, wearing a worn coat. Her hair had gone much grayer since the last time, almost 2 years since that day at the courthouse. I stood at the apartment entrance with my grocery bag. She saw me, stood, and took a few steps toward me, then stopped. About 10 feet away. Both hands clutching the suitcase handle. I walked over and stopped in front of her. "What are you doing here?" I asked. Her voice was a wreck, scratchy, worn. "Your brother, the early release, it didn't go through. I know you wouldn't sign the leniency letter." "That wasn't my decision," I said. "The court made that call." Her mouth tightened, but she didn't argue. She looked at the ground for a long time. Then she said, "Ella, I want to come back." I didn't answer. "I know I failed you," she said, her voice shaking. "That night, I shouldn't have said what I said. I shouldn't have done that to you. I think about it all the time. I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see you on the floor, and I see me clapping. I don't know what was wrong with me. There's something wrong with me." She looked up, her eyes rimmed in red, tears spilling. "Can you let me come back? I'll cook for you, take care of you. I know your leg bothers you. I can make soup. I'm not asking for anything else. I just want to be near you. And your brother, I won't bring him up again." She stepped forward and reached for my arm. I stepped back. Her hand stopped in midair. Her face collapsed, like she'd been slapped. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice steady. "That night, it wasn't some sickness. You knew exactly what you were doing. You chose Cole. You made that choice that night. And now you're here because Cole is in prison. You've lost your anchor. And you've realized the only person left who might still catch you is the trash you threw out." Her lips quivered violently, tears streaming, but she couldn't speak. "Do you know what hurt the most over these 2 years?" I said. "It wasn't the knee pain. It wasn't doing rehab alone. It wasn't the phone calls from relatives. It was that you never once asked me if I was okay. Not one letter. Not one call. Every time you came to me, it was for Cole." We stood in silence for a long time. The April wind blew through the street. A few passers-by looked at us curiously and moved on. My mother looked hollowed out, her grip on the suitcase handle slack. I watched her and finally said, "If you want to come back, there's one condition. Find a therapist. Work through your own issues. Get yourself straight. Then come to me. I don't need a mother who'll betray me again as soon as her son asks. I want a mother who can see me as an equal, who can respect me. When you can do that, I'll welcome you." I paused and added, "But if you came here today to ask me to get Cole a shorter sentence, then we've got nothing to talk about." My mother stared at me, tears smeared across her face. She opened her mouth and closed it, like a fish gasping. Finally, she wiped her face with her sleeve, hard, and nodded. "I'll see someone," she said, her voice splintering. "I'll go." She pulled her suitcase and turned away. I watched her cross the street and disappear at the corner, the wheels of the suitcase clattering behind her. I stood at the entrance with my groceries, the spring wind blowing my hair into my face. I shifted the bag to my other hand and went inside. That night I called Uncle Robert and told him what had happened. He was quiet on his end for a moment, then said, "You did right. She needs to figure herself out." "Uncle," I said, "was that too harsh?" "She's my mother." He sighed. "Ella, I can't say whether you're hard on others. But I do know you've been hard on yourself for over 20 years. It's time you were kind to yourself for a change. After I hung up, I sat on the sofa for a long time, staring at the wall. The cat jumped onto my lap and bumped its head against my hand. I scratched under its chin. It purred and closed its eyes. Outside, the moon was round and bright. I didn't know whether my mother would really go to therapy. I didn't know if someday she'd become someone I could trust again. But I knew I'd left the door cracked open. If she really chose to walk through it, I'd give her one more chance. This time, the threshold was mine.